Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I'm sure there'll be others who will be joining us later on. Um, and welcome to the International Physical Literacy Association webinar. Um, it's my pleasure to have joining us John Kearney, who is originally from Canada but is now in Australia, and whose perspectives I had the pleasure of listening to recently on a Sport for Life session. Um, John um, is a professor from Australia. We have Amit Malik, and Amit is the IPLA international lead. Amit is based in India. We also have Raymond Sum, who is based in Hong Kong, a professor in Hong Kong, and he is also responsible for instigating the Greater China Region Physical Literacy Association. We have Charlie Crane, who is based in England, based in Sport England, and is responsible for children and young people. As you're aware, the aim of the webinar is to ask our colleagues from different parts of the world how they define physical literacy, how it's been unpacked in their relevant countries. And then what we'll try and do, we'll explore this a little bit more as we move through. But I'm quite keen to get people talking. Um, so I'm going to start with John as he's the furthest away, and then I'm basically going to work time-wise back towards England. So starting with John, um, you've had a tremendous amount of experience in Canada, and you were very much involved in physical literacy in the early days. You've then shared your work in many countries around the world. You've gone to Australia, so you've got an understanding of that country as well. And as I just mentioned, you recently spoke at a Sport for Life webinar talking about the concept, unpacking the concept. So what I'd like you to do really is if you can highlight how the concept's been unpacked in Canada and Australia and the sort of potential positives and negatives in relation to that, that'll be fabulous. So I'll let you jump in there.
So you want me to go first? I think he's worried that I might fall asleep with
No,
time zone
you've
difference
come
here,
the
but
furthest, John. You've come the furthest.
it won't be possible because I know this will be a very stimulating discussion, which I'm looking forward to. Look, if I reflect on the Canadian experience, I mean, we went through a process many years ago now. Margaret was actually there. I think you might have been there too, Nigel, where we actually had a consensus statement on physical literacy and a process to arrive at that. And yeah, very much mirrored Margaret's work in terms of adhering to some of the core domains that she had identified very early in her work. I was always quite impressed by that process because I think it was a process that was intentional around drawing a diverse group of stakeholders together to think and some degree debate and unpack the concept. But I think we landed as Margaret did in her very early work, a concise but utilitarian definition of what physical literacy was. And I think that's important because as we all are passionate and committed to doing work in the community, we must confess that sometimes as academics we have a tendency to want to um, endlessly unpack and endlessly redefine, and so I think it was in my opinion it was a good process. If I contrast that with the Australian experience, and I do this somewhat reluctantly because I don't know if I've got colleagues online or not. They may not be happy with me, but that was a process where we landed with a much more complicated definition, with many more domains. And even though I think it was wonderful work and there was lots of things that were the positive things that came out of that, I worry that it was really just too complex for a lot of um, practitioners really to do much with it. And I think it contributed. I think it contributes as do some other definitions that are out there to an ongoing debate, which I find frankly a little frustrating, which is um, the beginning of a lot of academic papers in this field start out with we have no consensus on the definition of physical literacy. And I think, I think at an academic level, there's some merit and there's some truth to that. But as I always say, I look more for the similarities in the constructs than the differences. And I see many, many more similarities than I see differences. And I just worry, and I've said this to you before, Nigel, many times. I just worry that this is perhaps distracting as we are trying to get a global movement up and running. But I would just say one more thing, and that's that, I think, and this, I hope this will come out, and I'm sure it will in the discussions. I do accept that I very conveniently started from a Western conceptualization of physical literacy, very dependent on the English language. And as we move to other places, and I know Raymond has thought and done a lot of work in this area, we obviously do run into some challenges in terms of the way in which we translate specific words and what the meaning of those words are. And so I'm always very careful to couch that in the experiences of the West more so than the experiences of a pan-global kind of perspective on physical literacy.
John, if I can just tease you a little bit more,
Sure.
because I think what you're saying is absolutely brilliant. The idea of trying to get the simplicity of the concept, but also the clarity and the key principles is really key. Do you think the understanding within the different sectors within Canada and Australia, and from the sector's point of view, we're talking of education, we're talking of health, etc. Do you think the understanding is there based on the current definitions used? And I think you referred to perhaps the slightly more lengthy Australian definition and whether that has caused an issue in understanding. Do you think that understanding is there, or is there a lot more work to be done in relation to that?
Look, I think, there was something a lot of us observed in the early days, which was the one of the interesting things about the concept was that it created a broad church that brought a lot of people in, because they could see some of what they were doing inside of that construct. But what it led to, I think, was a kind of branding of physical literacy that you would start to see again in the literature, where you might have an intervention that was really a fundamental movement skills intervention, and it was hard really to separate it from, what we've historically seen in that field, rebranded as a physical literacy intervention. And I think a lot of us were very uneasy with that, so. But look, that was 10, 15 years ago. I really do think the field has advanced, and by the field I mean, in the applied context as well as the academic concept, a construct. And I think, um, Carl Johannes, that we've done some work with, you know, put out a couple of papers over the last couple of years, really trying to get frameworks that would allow people to understand, how you might describe a physical literacy intervention inside a research project, what you might be looking for if you were evaluating that kind of work. So I think there's a maturity in the field, I guess, Nigel, that I would say. So I do. I think you will still find lots of disagreement on the edges. And look, I think that's healthy. I think any concept that's worth its uh, worth its weight, I think, should have that kind of intellectual engagement where there's going to be debate, there's going to be attempts at recasting and growing the construct. But I think, yes, I think generally the level of literacy around physical literacy is much higher than it was when we started.
Yeah, and I think you raised another important point there about the number of academics and organizations who have continued to work on it, and the work of Johannes drawing people in together, looking at those key principles, effectively underpinning it. And as you say, it's looking at more at the similarities rather than the differences. And I know Margaret's on this call, and I know this is something. Perhaps in the early days, the IPLA were looking to confirm the definition and get everybody singing to the same hymn sheet, so to speak. But I know Margaret, in more recent years, has said, look, we know there are key principles that underpin all the definitions. And it's those key principles we're all actually working towards,
Yeah.
which is really important. Okay, that's great. We'll come back to you in a short while. Raymond, you're you're next nearest. Raymond has been involved with physical literacy for a long time. And as I mentioned earlier, he was responsible for setting up the Greater China Physical Literacy Association. And that's great because it's brought a lot of people together. And Raymond, what I'd like you to do, if you could, is sort of explain perhaps the process you went through with that Greater China region and how China and its wider area see the concept and how you see it unpacking as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. Welcome all participants. I can see some of the Asian face and old faces, and something I can still recall in the 2019 IPLA conference, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I think you remember the conference I present about how Chinese people philosophically understand physical literacy. So I want to remember a bit about this concern on the Chinese people, how they view, how they look at their body, and also how they become physically active back to maybe 2000 years ago or even earlier. So I want to talk about the philosophy first, because I come up with the Western education, and also I read the Bible, the Christianity one, and I found something is very coincidentally the philosophy of the Chinese people together with the Western people. They are more or less the same. From the Bible, I think you can see from the John's chapter 1, verses 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So this is the sentence triggered me about how Chinese people look at physical literacy. And see an example for the Taoist approach. We always look at the way we walk through in our life. So this is the first one. I want to draw members' attention on this. And the second one is about the Confucianism. So they highlight us, all Chinese educated individual. So from internal self to a greater self, including a physical literate individual, should have a positive attitude and equip him or her with skill and knowledge, and take care of himself or herself and others, and even the whole societies. So this is what a educated primary education level individual know about in the education system. So this could apply all to a physical literate individual in Greater China region, and even in mainland, in Taiwan, in Macau, and Hong Kong. So this is quite a traditional approach to teach someone at primary level. Okay, so when I further look at the model, in the Western model, like Margaret's model, with the interaction with the environment, and in Taoist approach, we also have a word called integration with with heaven and humankind. So we also play with the environment a lot. Okay, so another model is talking about how we move. So when I compare with the Western model, I found it is very similar philosophically when they apply to everyday's life, how we become more healthy. I believe many of you may also know qi, right? Qi gong, qi. So this is quite an abstract concept from the Western people to know more about what is the meaning of qi. Okay, So I want to emphasize here, Qi is one of our practice. And we practice Qigong, martial art, but I believe no one knows what Qi flow, like blood flow or heartbeat, or anything imbalanced in our body, or blockage or imbalance that we call Qi. Through exercise, through physically active, we will become more balanced. We will unblock all these muscle, joints. So this is all our belief through physical activities. Yeah, I think in terms of philosophical underpinning of this concept, we also want to apply a wholesome concept, not only we don't argue about the dualism and some other different concepts. We believe all this as a human being, we interact with the environment and different individual, different societies. We interpret this activity as a holism. Okay, so yeah, I think I can raise some of the understanding in our culture, how Chinese people practice their physical activity or physical literacy or in the education system. However, different education system, like in Taiwan, we have different philosophy. Okay, we have core literacy in education. But in Hong Kong, we don't have physical literacy, the term in the education system. We only practice in research, in some other area. The education barrier, it seems that they quite don't understand the term physical literacy in education setting. So different culture. Even we have a Greater China whole region, but we have different perspective, different policy, different patterns. That's why the implementation of physical literacy in 4 areas are different. Okay, thank you.
Right, Raymond. Again, I'm going to push you a little bit further if that's okay. I think you've raised many really important points. Firstly, in relation to culture and how all of us, our culture influences what we do anyway. And I think the different cultures have also influenced the different definitions from across the world, which again is absolutely fine. And I think what you're saying is from a Chinese cultural point of view, this holistic approach resonated with you, with Taoism, with Confucianism, etc. And it's expected and an acknowledged part of your everyday life anyway. And perhaps that's why you've easily adopted the concept. Now, the question is, obviously, you mentioned that in Taiwan, it's more understood, and in Hong Kong less. And I know I've fortunately recently been to China, and I know that really is an expanding area. So, from a Chinese point of view, which is a huge part of our global population, how would you say the concept is being unpacked there, and is it being understood in the same way?
I think at this stage, we implicitly understand physical literacy, the concept. We understand it well in terms of how implement our activity level, how we move, how we participate in organized physical activity. We all know this, but we don't have this so-called explicitly physical literacy terminology everywhere. Yeah, except Taiwan. Taiwan, they have the policy, and then also they execute the quality PE, QPE idea very well. But we just in Hong Kong and in Macau, and also in I think many of you may know from the BBC News in China, they are they are now executing a 1 hour everyday PE lesson in addition to another 1 hour free extra curriculum activities. Yeah, 2 hours activities each day in primary school setting.
I mean, that's fabulous. Is this a recent initiative?
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
will they have qualified practitioners who are providing?
Yes, this is the concern. Yeah, we also have different system. In Hong Kong, all PE teacher from primary school to secondary school, they are subject specialists.
Mhm.
In Taiwan and in mainland China, the system is also different. The primary school teacher, they may not be a subject specialist. They can be a generalist. So this is the system different. So in response to your question, in China, they worry about how professional of this teacher who look after this physical activity, including structure and non-structured physical activity.
And I think this is perhaps another issue that we could discuss in great length, possibly on another day. The fact of having qualified, experienced practitioners providing physical activity experiences for anyone, particularly in schools, is so important. And I think when you look at across countries across the world, there aren't many who've actually got that right at the moment. Raymond, thanks for the time being. And I think what you've just said will link very nicely into me bringing Amit into it. Amit is from Hyderabad in India. He was responsible for inviting the IPLA to India over 8 years ago now. And he almost single-handedly has been responsible for sharing physical literacy in India. He's been so proactive; it's been untrue, and he's managed to get in all parts of society. So, Amit, if you can share, where you see physical literacy, how it links to the Indian culture, I think that's the key, and how it's been unpacked by yourself and others.
Thank you, Nigel, and good to hear two perspectives before me. Uh, so for India, as I think John also started, we were looking for a solution which is for everyone to relate to. And we were closely working with our national badminton coach, who's an elite coach, and he felt that once they get medal in badminton, the many children will take up the sport. This was a hypothesis, and through academy, we got many medals, even at Olympics, and struggling that the experience of child is not being given enough importance. And we wanted some generic solution for everyone. Our initial introduction happened through Canadian model of FMS oriented and sports skill oriented more. And when we started the tone of the program at the ground level, we found that this is very tough to manage that kind of expectation into Indian environment, especially public schooling system which we were dealing with. They're very limited infrastructure, limited equipment, and to have that stringent model that this is what it is, this is the way to assess it. And at that time, we look for some other options, and then we reach out to IPLA. And the first thing for us to connect was the one tone was, this is it, this is physical literacy. And with Margaret and Nigel, the first question was, how does India as a culture look upon physicality? What do your culture look like? What do your student like to do in their choice if they're given some physical activities? So that was very liberating for us to look upon a model which is more holistic, which is giving us freedom to look into inside first, then connect back, again going inside, connecting back to the perspective. So our effort has been to take the more holistic message to the communities, advocacy level, policy making, and of course, a lot of teacher trainings as well. If I were to summarize, initial part, need was felt clearly. So the concept connection was easier. But we had to shift it to Indian culture quite a lot. Our model of yoga and few more philosophies of physical culture has been defined in India before. So physical culture, they are defined from a spiritual side that bringing consciousness, awareness, enjoyment to every cell of the body is called physical culture, as one of our ancient guru or talk about it. So we use that literature. Yoga is quite similar to monism, where it says that our existence is through body, mind, and soul together. So that these two perspectives help us to connect to audience in a more creative way. That this is not what we don't have. We have a different objective of this model, but physical literacy has a similar perspective on the philosophy side. So that was easier for us. Other thing which we did, especially Indian context, the physical education sports sector is not very matured in India. Maybe quite similar to China in many sense. The courses are still very run in very command-centric teaching, even in the physical education colleges. So we had this tough challenge initially to make a more holistic, liberal concept to a model where everything is very command-centric, is very judgmental. You test the children, they check their fitness, so and so forth. So we have used more of a reflection, more interactive sessions. Rather than we telling what is physical literacy, we ask them, call somebody whom you believe their health is important to you and check in their life journey. Go through life journey of each individual, what makes them active, what makes them fall out of sports or in their trajectory of physical activities, so that there's more reflection, connection, and then they feel, oh, I never thought about the experience of my mother, my father, my teacher. Then you say, here is the model. If you never thought about the experience, here's a model which values the holistic experience as the key goal, not as just the physical activity you are being part of. So, in a way, our unpacking has been, we thought need was simple, then it was complicated for us to communicate the way audience understand. But now we have been able to unpack in a more holistic way, and more audience is getting aligned to it. I'm in a workshop, and yesterday, the chief national coach of Indian athletics, the Indian athletics chief coach, was at the opening ceremony of a physical literacy workshop. And he said, he's never spoken to me. I don't know him. And he said, somebody asked me what is physical literacy? He said, it is from birth till death. And I was like, oh my God, I've done something meaningful to change perspective of elite coach of the Indian athletics. He's using a terminology which we have been doing. So this is the way we have been doing this, simplifying the message, connecting to the audience, which they will understand, and making progress every day.
I mean, I want to again pick up on a few things. First of all, within India, as with many countries, and just from a physical education point of view, there are a lot of challenges within schools. The majority of schools in India are government schools. Government schools traditionally have quite poor facilities and usually very limited equipment, and often class sizes between 50 and 80, with one possibly very inexperienced teacher. So those obviously provoke different challenges to different people. But I think what you've pulled in there, and it links in nicely to Raymond's, is the spiritual aspect of physical literacy, the holistic valuing within the culture, but also the challenge in relation to sport. And I know, because I've experienced the schools, a lot of schools in India, and sport becomes that focus rather than a physical education and a holistic experience. And it's sort of changing people's views in relation to that. Now, you've done a lot of work with policymakers, higher education institutions, the Sports Society Accelerator. Can you just sort of share a bit of that and perhaps indicate how that has has impacted as well. That would be great.
Sure, Nigel. So in the policy making side, of course, since we have elite coach leading it, and now Mr. Abhinav Bindra, who's our Olympic gold medalist, is quite vocal about being physical literacy as a goal of all the sports program. So this has helped. So I kind of write on their behalf, support them to advocate the rightful messages. Other important part has been to say the right thing every time. It is tough. Many of the situation where we are not liked, still we say the holistic things, not getting aligned with just that is testing fitness of children, or not aligning to the LTAD way of looking at physical literacy. So we just maintain the purest message in with our pure spirit. That has really helped because now people are starting connecting to it. It has taken a lot more time. Another thing we thought in India that, of course, we need to do advocacy, training, research. We kind of build everything wherever we get the opportunity. So that's also one thing which has worked. If we get an opportunity to advocate to a CEO of a company, we have done it. If we get opportunity to train teachers, we have done it. We feel that if the more people speak the language, advocacy, training, everything will support each other in a sense. So our advocacy is main led by the role model of the society. We sing the rightful message consistently, and also our way of challenging has become more warm in substance. Initially, we used to say, okay, FMS is wrong, or fitness testing is wrong. Now we have changed that. Let's understand that will it lead to children's engagement? Let's question it. If you have done something, you are very knowledgeable, you are policy maker. We understand you have a lot of knowledge. But let's look back. If you take this model to your child in your family and say, I'll test you 5 times, and then some children will say, if I'm not interested in maths and I'm taken maths exam monthly, I'll not even look at my maths book again in my whole life. So we start bringing a lot of child's perspective as well to policymaker, that how can a testing make somebody interested in sport? This is not working anyways. So multiple ways, but other thing which we had done with policymakers, when we used to talk about physical literacy, it never used to connect. We bring them to ground. And he's school leader. Okay, let's go to ground, do some activity. So make them do, then reflect upon what did you experience in just 15 minutes. So that has also worked for us, that rather than talking, let them experience and reflect upon.
That's brilliant. And yeah, I've been involved in a number of the practical sessions that we've done in India, and you know, the joy and the social environment that's created from those practical activities makes people reflect on their own physical literacy. I think what you've said very clearly links nicely into Charlie and her work from Sport England. As I mentioned earlier, Charlie's in charge of children and young people with Sport England. And she was responsible, amongst others, for leading the consensus process in the UK with Lawrence, who I know is on the call as well, from John Moores. And I think some of the things that you've just mentioned there, Amit, getting a consistent message, talking about positive physical activity engagement, and looking at the child's perspective as well, getting people to have that children's voice linked absolutely perfectly into, I think, what Charlie is going to be sharing now. So thanks, Amit, for the time being. And Charlie, can I ask you to provide us with an indication of how things have progressed in England?
Yes, thanks very much, Nigel, and great to hear from John Raymond and Amit as well. I think a starting point for us has been the richness of the international learning. I think we've learned so much in England, so a huge thank you to colleagues on the call who we've leaned on over the last few years. So for us, our starting point for our work on physical literacy is that our children's activity levels have remained fairly unchanged over the last few years in England. And in our 10-year strategy, Uniting the Movement, we recognised that we needed to think and do things differently as a sector if we were to turn the dial on inactivity and inequalities. And this is where our real interest in physical literacy began. So back in 2022, as Nigel's just said, we invested in Liverpool John Moores University to lead the physical literacy consensus statement process. And this was led by Dr. Lawrence Fairweather, who great to have on the call today too. And the process involved national consultations with a whole range of different partners. It involved evidence reviews. And I think the real crown and the jewel in the crown was we created an expert panel of 60 academics and stakeholders who came together over a number of months to co-develop the consensus statement for England. So it was a consensus statement written together for the sector. So this wasn't a Sport England, let's sit in a room and think about a consensus statement. This is very much, we've done this together with the sector. And our key learning from our consensus process has been the rich blend of academics and stakeholders was a real strength, because the academics and researchers who are so passionate, understandably, around the philosophy of physical literacy were able to give the process robustness and credibility. But this was then balanced with the perspectives and experiences of the stakeholders who would ultimately be responsible for translating the consensus statement into our policies, practice and programmes. So Nigel's asked me to draw out some of the positives of the process that we found. We then published our consensus statement back in September 2023 with over 100 stakeholders spanning community sport, education, planning, health and transport. And we were really lucky to have Professor Margaret Whitehead join us for the event and to have the continued support of the IPLA throughout our consensus journey. And this event, really quite high profile for us at Sport England. We, lots of traction on LinkedIn, lots of newspaper and journal articles around it. And it created a real buzz around physical literacy across our sector. And this resulted in us finding some fantastic early adopters who saw the physical literacy consensus statement for England, really believed in it and wanted to drive it forward within their own work. We did, however, find, as Nigel said, focus on some of the drawbacks we found as well, is once we published the statement, stakeholders from various sectors told us they'd seen it, they loved it, but they didn't quite know where to start in terms of embedding it into their work. And that's why last year we at Sport England have invested over the next 2 years into something called the Positive Experiences Collective, which is a forum in which we bring together any partner from any sector to come together to test, to learn and to apply the principles of physical literacy into their policies, programmes and practice. And in year one, we're really excited to be working with 36 different organisations who all share a belief that using physical literacy as their North Star can really help children and young people and their families find a lifelong love of movement and physical activity. And the stories for change have really started to come out now. And for us in England, we need these stories for change from health, from community sport, from education, from planning. We've got Trevor on the call here today to really help mobilise even more partners to really understand what physical literacy is and why it can make a real difference to both their policies and their practice. So I'd say we're still relatively early in our journey as a country when you look at the likes of Canada or Australia. But for us, we've been really pleased with the progress and the collaborative way in which we've mobilised sectors, not just within our sports sector, to really understand what physical literacy is. We've got a lot of work to do, but I think we've made some great progress in the last couple of years, Nigel.
Charlie, I mean, that's a very good summary of the work that's gone on recently. And I think what was important from my point of view is that Sport England very sensibly looked at what had been done elsewhere in the world, and I'm just thinking back to New York, which was someone just said it was 2 years ago, so it doesn't, which is crazy, and how you went around, you talked to lots of different people at the Sport for Life conference. You heard particularly from Ireland. So where Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland had come together, they'd brought different sectors together and they'd worked on that consensus statement, and then they'd share that consensus statement. And I think it's really important that's been done. I think perhaps the uniqueness now is how Sport England are working with other organisations to help unpack that further. And Charlie, if you can just explain how the groups that you're now getting together, the 36 different organizations are going to work over the next year, and potentially that should lead to more evidence and understanding of what actually works. That would be great.
Yeah, of course. I've actually popped in a link into the chat there, Nigel,
Okay,
which
thanks.
takes you to our Positive Experiences Collective. There's two years of this. So year one, we're halfway through at the moment, and we were oversubscribed with the number of organisations who wanted to be part of the programme, which is great. And it shows the level of interest in partners needing support to translate the consensus statement into practice. And we've got 36 organisations working in teams of 3. So we've got some focused on planning, we've got some focused on the community football trusts, we've got others that are working with children's services. So we've got a really rich blend of organisations being part of this programme who will come together at 5 gatherings over a 9-month period. And it's a part leadership, part accelerator programme. So it's about empowering them to be leaders for this work. And being real advocates for change, for physical literacy and wider, but also to accelerate their ideas on how applying the lens of physical literacy to their policies and work can drive real change. Because like I said, we need to do something different in England. We've done the same for year after year, and activity levels aren't changing amongst our young people, and that's a real worry. So we're hopefully using this accelerator programme over 9 months to get those real early adopters for physical literacy in a room together to really understand what each other are doing and how they can use the consensus statement to think and do things differently, both as individuals, as 3 organisations, but also then across their level of influence here in England. So for some of that, like the England Football League Trust, that's a national organisation involved in this. And then we've got some really localised children's services being involved too, who believe that they can drive change in how they're engaging families by applying that kind of relationship piece to their work with children and families. So we've also then got things called listening circles, which anyone is welcome to join us. So if anyone on today's call is interested, they're happening every quarter. And that's an opportunity for anyone not part of the Patchwork programme, those 36 organisations, to come together and learn on the job, really, from what we're finding, what we're learning through those 36 organisations. It's all free to access for organisations to be part of. And I think for us, it's trying to take physical literacy as far and wide and as fast as we can possibly make it while we've got the energy and the momentum here in England. So it's more like a catalyst for us, Nigel.
And you, again, put out beautifully there, Charlie. So you've explained, I think, what is a really innovative, novel way of doing things. And I think there's a key point there, and it's the driver for change. Why are we actually doing this? And I'm going to drop back now to John, Raymond, Amit, because you've now heard each person. So John, your thoughts? I mean, I think the driver for change potentially in Canada in the early days was for Olympic medals. If I remember talking to people from Sport for Life, and it was that long-term athlete development and physical literacy will fit into that. That's the way I understand it. But perhaps you could provide a little bit more. What is that driver for change, you think, and has it changed?
Look, I think there's sometimes a confusion around the long-term athlete development model. I think the innovation in Canada was the rectangularization of the long-term athlete model, which was to say that the pyramid needed to be not necessarily flipped, but made into a rectangle, so that the emphasis on elite performance was modified or downgraded, I guess, in the system. I think I now sit at one of the world's top-ranked sport universities that in a city that's going to be hosting the Olympics and Paralympics in 2032. And for me, the conversations are very much around the legacy of the games, and again, there's we could probably have 2 or 3 sessions on the controversies and challenges around legacy. But I think very much the conversation now, and I think this has been the linkage of physical literacy and its place in health that has led to broader conversations around I guess one of our North Stars is, and you've alluded to this, Charlie, others have as well, that we have a significant problem of inactivity. We haven't really been able to move the needle on, despite incredible amounts of energy that have gone into interventions. And I think there are those of us who believe that physical literacy offers a particular and novel way of trying to facilitate that change, because it brings in those other domains of learning and understanding that are around affect, that are around engagement, that are around culture and spirituality and all the things that you've mentioned. Move us away from proscriptive, guideline-based, messaging around acquiring, so many minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity. Not that I think there's anything wrong with that, but it hasn't. I don't think it's had the penetration that we hoped it would. And so I think physical literacy, in some sense, is one of the reasons why I think there's so many people on this call and why so many people are attracted to it. Is it offers a different way of engaging, and to me, the interesting thing has always been its power to bring to really be a galvanizing force in a multi-sectoral way. And again, I think you've all touched on that in various ways in which you've described it. Even at physical literacy conferences at IPLC, you get people that are working in public health, you get people in the education system, you get people in all sorts of different places in sport, and these are groups that don't often talk together, and they should talk more. And I think physical literacy has a real potential to be a bit of an ambassador to bring those different groups together. And so I think that is happening. I think you're probably right. Its origins were in sport, but it sort of uncoupled itself, I think, quite rapidly in Canada, and I would say in Australia too, from sport, and basically took on its own identity, which isn't to say that sport isn't important, but I think people realized very early on that it was much more than just about a sport agenda. It was a much broader agenda and a movement than that. So I think that's been good.
That's great, and I think you've mentioned the importance of the multi-sectoral approach, and the issue with minutes of moderate to vigorous activity. And I think this is something, again, in England, certainly we're going, yeah, okay, 60 minutes is fine, but it's got to be 60 minutes of quality, positive experiences. And if it's 40, that's better than 60 of experiences that aren't positive. And it's changing that focus. And I think that will take time because of the WHO and etc. But also, I think what I like there is you sort of raise the golden thread of physical literacy, that's drawing all these different sectors together, and that's certainly how we see it. In relation to other points, you mentioned Olympism, and that's interesting because I'll drop into Amit with this, and health, and these are obvious key drivers. But I've also seen that Gillian's on the call, and I know Margaret's on the call, and this idea of flourishing as an individual is really important. But I'll perhaps pick that up with Margaret a little bit later. Amit, can I come back to you then in relation to that? Perhaps the links. What's driving it in India, would you say?
So initially, it started, of course, with more sports and little bit of education agenda, that physical education needs to be strengthened and physical literacy is a growing concept. Our first work as a policy was sports policy work, where we had to write a policy how to get 60 million people to be active. And the policy had initially looked at sports, community sports, then starting some shape of health as well. I remember one of the ministers saying that is very interesting. He said that, can we convert hospital to stadiums? Can we convert medical shops to sports shops one day, hopefully? So because when he understood, we know that direction is getting more holistic. It's not limited to sports. Probably after COVID, it has gone more on the health and education side because of the situation, the large population and large number of young people in India. So currently, I would say it's more through route of education and health, with sports also a touch point, which is quite changed in India in last 8 years or so. And within education, we are seeing uh, good acceptance, higher education, school education, both the sides. Sports still flavor some part remains, and that will always be there because a lot of the sports physical activity budgets typically come from sports department. So they are the people who already always need to be kept in loop. But more and more alignment at the education level, I would say, more concrete program at the education level. And connecting to John's point, since I am also the lead for the Olympic Values Education Program in India, I lead Olympism initiative. So there also I find some interesting part, though it is more sports and values. Through Olympism, I've seen a lot of non-sports teacher taking interest because it opens up the door of the art, opens up all activities of the Olympism initiative. So that has also, in a way, strengthened the physical literacy initiative in many ways because a lot of non-sports teacher who use art, dance, and other activities, they can get into program through value-based education as well, where they see outcome as some kind of more on affective domain in physical literacy. So those initiatives, I think both are also supporting in some sense, just because there is some common thread. Of course, there are different threads as well. But currently, I think it's more of education health night, just to summarize it.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly the case, and certainly the Fit India, the Fit India project, and Olympic medals focus has had an influence, I think, and it's what you've done very well is you've changed that narrative to become about everyone, not just a few. Raymond, in Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, what would you say the driving forces are within the Greater China region?
Yeah, I think most probably is similar to other region, Western region and in India. I think many of the government officials, including in the elite sports systems, they don't know much about physical literacy. They, they focus more on how to train well, how to win. And I remember a few years ago, I presented in a conference. All the participants are coach and government official and national association, sporting body. If I include those coaching concepts, for example, ecological dynamics, they will know how physical literacy influence all their athletes. If I don't include those concepts, they will only focus on training, periodization, and yeah, some different issues. But I think there's a lot room for improvement in our countries. So I think in mainland China, the system is different, the school system, because they have a sports school, right? And also in Taiwan, in the afternoon, all secondary school, if they regarded themselves as in a sport school, all afternoon they will spend the time for training, for sport training, yeah, inter-school level training.
Yeah.
Okay, so because same as Macau and Hong Kong, so we we think that in public health setting, I think we implicitly we have this concept, yeah, together with physical activity, physical fitness, and in school system, physical education. Though the concept physical literacy can be included in this implicitly, but as I said, mentioned earlier, it is hard for policymaker to use this term. Yeah, I think we have a lot to go.
Okay, thanks for that, Raymond. And I think one language, and certainly working a lot with European countries, unpacking physical literacy. And I know Stathis is on here from Greece, and I think they have 3 different terms they can use for physical literacy. Never mind actually unpacking the concept, then it's having that term, and that's certainly the case for other countries as well. Charlie, from an England point of view, we're moving forwards in unpacking it. What do you see as the key issues now to get more of, let's say, an action or an impact? How are we going to make those changes, would you say? And again, I'll come back to John, Amit and Raymond in that. So apologies, Charlie, for throwing you that curveball in at this point.
No, that's absolutely fine, Nigel. Happy to go first. I think for us, we've reached a bit of a crossroads, if I'm being completely honest. And we recognise this because I think following the publication in 2023, it became a real buzzword. Physical literacy became, everyone needs to be doing physical literacy, everyone needs to learning about it. And again, speaking to other countries, there's an opportunity there. There's also a risk that it stays as a buzzword. And actually, how do we make it stick? And we're in the sticky phase at the moment. So at the moment there's a live piece of work. We've got the Positive Experiences Collective, which I think is getting us the traction and getting the compelling stories for change. So that's happening over here. We've got the good practice, so we're keeping momentum going. But what we've heard from partners is they need more support in advocating for physical literacy. So there's a current piece of work happening with a number of academics and physical literacy experts. So Nigel is one of them, involved in this work. And we're creating, and Dr. Lawrence Fairweather, and we're creating a slide deck to talk through and unpack the statement, which any partner can pick up and run with for their own personal development or for training purposes. And we're also looking at a working title, bear with me, an enactment guide, which is we're looking at drawing out with these experts, what are the principles? So that so what question that keeps coming back to us in England, and everyone, we love it. What do we do with it? So what? What's the change we're trying to see here? So this enactment guide is part of our way of trying to support partners to see the so what as we build these compelling stories for change through the collective. So it's very much, here's the consensus statement. This could be your starting point. Here are the principles within it. So person-centered, it's holistic, it's youth-led. So that's kind of how do you get going with physical literacy, and then being very clear that the relationship piece is the outcome. That's what we're hoping to drive the change for here, is to shift maybe a national governing bodies of sport perspective from my sport to this activity, to this weekly training session. Actually, your role there as a coach, as a teacher, spans a life course of that child, and actually trying to flip the hearts and minds around, you may have a very small part in that child's relationship with movement, but it is going to last that lifetime, and have that focus on the long-term outcome, because we now define physical literacy as our relationship with movement and physical activity. So where we're at, not quite sure if I'm answering your question, Nigel. I think we have a risk where it can fade away. And our role at Sport England, with our physical literacy advocates that are spread across multiple sectors here in England, keep bringing us back together. Litmus test, where's the energy? How do we keep building this momentum around physical literacy? Because we all believe it can be a game changer, and there's been the missing jigsaw puzzle in all the investment we've thrown at trying to get children, adults active and enjoy being active. So it's that constant reset, see what's happening, what else does the sector need to run with this, as a real way of applying this to their lens, as a lens to their work.
Thanks, Charlie. And I think there's a few things that are really important there. One is the freedom of sharing materials, and often as academics, you're always keen to keep hold of what you've got, and certainly the IPLA, we've always been keen to share whatever we have and encourage people to share what they have as well. The other thing I think you've raised there is the importance of, first of all, knowledge and understanding, getting people to understand that. And certainly my experience with James Craig, who was at British Fencing, is now at British Wheelchair Basketball. He gets the concept and he wants to thread it through the work of the organization. So when he was at British Fencing, it did link directly through the work. They were looking to develop individuals holistically. Yes, fencing was the vehicle, but they were looking at that holistic development. And he's doing the same. He's just moved to British wheelchair basketball. He's doing the same there. So it's that advocacy. John, if I come to you in relation to that, how, what are we going to do next almost?
I'm very much a believer that the ultimate success of this will be a grassroots movement. It needs to be built up from the bottom, and that isn't to say that there aren't important roles for government, for education, for the universities to play. But I think you just described it quite nicely, and Charlie as well, that for this to really take, you're going to have to seed it in a lot of different places and accept the fact that it will look different in different contexts. And I love your sport analogy, and I think that's a really great way to think about it. We often found ourselves, certainly in Canada, talking to people about exactly what you said. How I'm excited by this construct. I'm not quite sure how I could make it happen and where I'm working and working for helping people to find that. And once they're on that journey, they actually really do wonderful, I think, experimentation with embedding it all over the place. And I think that's ultimately for me where we need to go with this. And I think the universities in particular, have an important role to play there. I mean, there's obviously the research and the evaluation and certainly the education component of whether it's training the next generation of physical education teachers or training people within the sports sector more broadly. I think the other role that we can play, and IPLC does this too, is be honest brokers in this. That the opportunities to do things like this, to bring people together, to share information, knowledge, share stories that work. I've been really impressed at the movement of physical literacy conferences that exist across Canada and Europe and various places, Asia as well, that really all about creating as many opportunities as we can to bring multiple people together, bring people in and have that information sharing. It would be lovely to think you could drive this in a top-down way. Perhaps I don't, but you can imagine if you had endless resources and a huge impetus to do something that was being driven by a major stakeholder in society like a government, you could see change potentially quicker. But I think meaningful change comes it's slowly, and I think it's at a grassroots level. And I think so. In that sense, I applaud everyone in the room because I think you're doing exactly what you need to do in order to make this work.
That's great. Thanks, John. Raymond, any thoughts on that? Obviously, you've got a role in China as well.
Yeah, I think apart from the backdrop behind, we have a definition, but we are planning to have a consensus statement following other countries' practice to influence the policymaker. And the second thing is about the bottom-up approach. So we have connect with different association, community, sport association, and professional association. Now what we are doing is to set up different advocacy leaders to plan to work with different sports and different community. Like we have a YMCA in Hong Kong. We have very more than 100 years history, the sport association. So this is another suggestion. And we also have a social enterprise. So this social enterprise can, from bottom up to have a, I don't know whether Margaret still like the term assessment, but we want to firstly touch on the assessment to test the students' fundamental movement skills, sport-related fitness, and also the we call it sport talent development. So this is from bottom up to influence others. And another issue is I echo with John's comment on the university role. As for the teacher education institution, in my working department, we have an informal curriculum in physical literacy as an elective subject. So for those reservist PE teacher, they can learn more about what is about physical literacy and their domains and different practice philosophical, operational, and assessment. So after graduate, they can include this and build on their secondary and primary school curriculums. So this is what I suggest.
Yeah, and there's some interesting comments in the chat, which I'll come to in a moment, about in England at the moment we're going through a new government, so it'll potentially a new curriculum, and particularly a PE curriculum, and it's how much physical literacy actually informs or underpins that. That could be really significant, but we'll perhaps pick that up in a moment. Amit, any thoughts about India? What where are you going to go next, basically?
So I think last 8 years we have been able to make a lot of advocacy progress, training progress. One critical step would be to getting budgets for this.
Mm-hmm.
We have an interest, but it's more like sport. Yeah, we want it. It's very interesting. But if 90% of money still goes for elite sport, that's why next struggle would be to get more budget in education and sports and health, which is for this initiative. There's an interest, intent, but need to translate to action. Also in India, we have been able to influence and work with a lot of partners here. Like we have Piramal Foundation, Tata Trust, a lot of most of the physical education organizations, small organizations working in India, there's some alignment with us on the philosophy and the rightful messaging. So we want to do that, bring more partners together to align to holistic understanding of physical literacy. And definitely we would need more and more leaders, advocates, trainers to drive that next scale up, because we have been able to get initial interest, intention is there. So even people development who can rightfully take the message and the implementation forward will be a key in India.
And one of the challenges, obviously, in India is the size of the country and the number of people within that country, as is similar in China. Karen, I'd like to just pick up anything from the chat. And Margaret, just to pre-warn you, I'd like to come to you in a little while and just to get your thoughts on what's being said, if that's okay. So just bear with me. We'll just see if there's anything from the chat from Karen's point of view.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. I think I've made one response is that just there's so much connectivity, in terms of, and wherever people are situated in whatever people roles, that they have, that there is, there's some sense making to be done, and and people are making the connections. So there are, the main thing is, thank you for the contributions that are in the chat. What I'll do is I will collate all of those so we've got them, and then we'll send some information out following, just to see whether we might be able to pick up on some of the points, because there have been some call outs for some support. There have been some connections, linking back to the to what Charlie's been sharing. So if we can just try and put something together that people will be able to connect back, that'll be great. Thank you.
And Karen, it's something that you always say is, what does it mean to me?
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I'm just looking at Charlie nodding there, and I think that's what people want to know. Okay, so what does it mean to me? The other thing, before I ask Margaret to make some comments, if there's something you want us to put on, an event that's similar to this, what would you want us to talk about? And I know John mentioned perhaps the elephant in the, or no, Raymond mentioned the assessment. So, that might be something that we pick up. We have got a plan of a sequence of these, and assessment is within that. But is there anything else that you would like us to have a conversation about like this? Margaret, any thoughts on what you've heard so far this morning?
Yes, well, I could hardly say no. I mean, I think it's been excitingly well informed, and speaking from experience, I think the thing that has disappointed me in the last 3 to 4 years is the way that people say, "Oh, I'm no good at sport. Sport's not for me," and they just throw it on one side. And it does alarm me somewhat that the government seem to want us to win more medals and be more successful. Now, I'm not against medals, but I feel that the experiences that I've had in my lifetime of physical activity and the way that I have been able to join in with them or not join in with them when I had 2 knees and 2 hips replaced, um, I was able to make it rewarding for me, self-affirming for me. So I could no longer do what I used to do, because if you land on knees when you've just had them, operated on, I was just trying to think of how exciting it is that we have been so successful. You have been so successful for spreading the word. The second or third book or something that I've written have actually identified what we've been able to do. Um, I am concerned that we might get swallowed up by health. I'm not against health, but people say, "Oh, I'm no good. I always fail," and we're not in for failing. We're in for capitalizing on an aspect of our being, and the link up of doing and thinking and being and doing things with other people. So I was just thinking really what we were doing at this stage with physical literacy. And the early books were all about people who are working in the field and had examples of success in the fact that people were more realistic about what they can do, and the teaching was sensitive. The teaching was for each individual child, and I shall never forget the sort of buzz that there was in our meetings or our conferences. And oh, well, now I understand it, and now I know how we use the words. And I would love to talk to people and get some injections of excitement and frustration and help. I'm not quite sure if I'm up to writing a book. I've had a nasty accident on the stairs, so that I'm not myself at the moment. Um, I would love to find a way where I could come back into the field. I'm just reading the book about holism and the linking the intelligence with the and body. And I like the book very much, and I think that's exciting. But people were actually talking about it. They began to talk about physical literacy, and we had conferences. We had people we knew, people who we didn't know, and they came away with it. Well, Margaret said this. I want to find out what it means, and that type of thing. Um, and there's so much more going on now than there was when we first started. But it's up to you who are listening to us all talking now, how much the people have become excited, have spread the word, and have wanted to try and use it in order to succeed in interesting people, not to win, but to take part in physical activity.
Margaret, that's fabulous, and I think that's a real message to us all: is to work cooperatively, and to share our experiences, which I think, listening to the guests we've had on today, that's certainly the case. So perhaps a final word before we wrap this up. Again, I'll start with John. Any thoughts from a final word point of view?
I think Margaret revisited a really important theme, which is the never underestimating the power of conversation, and to be able to engage and with others and really explore these ideas, but coming to and I think many people have said it, coming to their own understanding of this and what it means in the context in which they live, work, and they are. And I think that's yeah, I think that's a really powerful thing. And I agree, it's been an incredible journey over the last 15, 20 years to be part of this. And I thank everyone for allowing me to be part of the journey.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Raymond?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. I feel very inspired by other speakers and also Margaret. Yes, I think right, we need to respect different cultures and respect different individuals' capability in terms of their interpretation of their physical literacy. I want to make a remark on our Chinese people, what we are think. We think the guidelines for physical activity level every day we need to exercise 60 minutes. Those concepts may not be appropriate to someone who is know their body well, know their situation, know their condition. They just listen to their body. Okay, so someone who may not exercise as enough according to the guideline, but he is also physically literate and also physically active. So this, I think respect is one of the issue I want to raise here. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond. Amit?
I think first would be to make it issue of theirs to ours. When we talk about sports, they are not getting medal, children are not. Some this they caught over some third person. So I think key thing which we are doing with it, it is ours. It is we, our, we, I has to be starting point. So that it is connecting to me, my family, my friends. So it has to start with us as a beneficiary in the target segment. Second would be the culture part of it, that we have been more successful starting conversation from the culture than bringing to the concept. And then, of course, the conversation partnership are the critical part, have been successful, and we keep on building upon those to take it forward.
Yeah, and I know you always say about you do a lot of work with groups, and you always talk about that personal reflection, getting people to think about their engagement in physical activity and movement and how powerful that is. And I think that's really
And to be reflective, I think we need to be honestly reflective.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie?
Sorry, Nigel, I coughed at that point. Was that back to me? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Sorry.
Any final thoughts?
Sorry. No, firstly, just thank you, Nigel. It's been absolutely fantastic to be on the call with other international colleagues. And again, we're just in this sense of just wanting to learn. We've met with Tom in Sweden, we've learned so much from Change the Game. And I think for us in England, it's so exciting to feel part of this international movement around something so important. A couple of reflections from me is in England, Emma Mackenzie from Youth Sport Trust talks about this a lot, which is to help bring others into this growing movement around physical literacy, we need to get personal before we get professional. So actually, when you're speaking to a health practitioner, teacher, coach, whoever it may be, what has been their relationship with movement? Because that then helps them understand how they can influence the person in front of them's relationship with movement. So that personal reflection piece is really important. And secondly, imposter syndrome. I think this is such a wonderful philosophy it's kind of been locked in the world of academia research, and between us all, we're trying to unlock it and unleash it. But actually, how do we support colleagues in multiple sectors to talk confidently about physical literacy? Because if I'm not an academic, at times I've been like, oh gosh, but actually my specialism is how do you translate it into practice? So I think the combination of the deep-rooted philosophy with the practitioner perspective and finding the balance between the two will help this grow at scale. And like John said, it can then be driven by the bottom up as well as kind of the top down from a policy sort of academic theory perspective as well. So lots of opportunity, but just a big thank you, Nigel, for the invitation.
No, well, thank you to all the guests, John, Raymond, Amit, and Charlie, and it's been wonderful having Margaret on. And I've just read a comment that was really supportive of Margaret. The impact you've had on the sector, your knowledge, your expertise, your work started this all off, Margaret. And I know you've been celebrated from a YST point of view, from an AFPI point of view, organisations within England and the UK. Your work has started a revolution. We know there's a lot to do. And what's really exciting is hearing from our presenters today about the richness and the variety of things that are going on. IPLA are keen to keep supporting and moving things forward, and we welcome your suggestions as to other things that we can do to help you understand the concept and help us all to move it forward. So thanks very much for today. It's lovely to see so many people on, and looking at the lists, so many people that we've worked with in the past. So once again, thank you for everyone, and have a good day or a good evening. John, you can have your glass of wine now, and Raymond as well, I think, and not far off you, Amit, but the rest of us have got a bit of a day to go through. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Karen, did you say you were going to catch hold of the chat?
Yeah, we've got the chat. I've got the chat. So yeah,
Brilliant.
I'll got that. So we've got that information.
That's
Super.
fabulous.
Fab. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Nigel.
Did you enjoy that, Margaret?
Oh, yes, yes.
It was really nice, wasn't it, to see everyone from the different countries and their different points of view, which is...
I mean, what's interesting is that we are tackling some of the problems that we've been given by the government. This business, there's no point in having any PE because we're going to do it all about health. We're going to involve that man who gets the children to dance around. I'm not against him, but that I think there's more to what we've got, and it's not finding something that suits everybody. It's finding a way which everybody can relate to, and then take strides.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who it was to say we want it. How does it belong to us? It belongs to us because we are like this. We're very similar, and the book that I'm reading now is just fascinating.
That's good. That's good. Right. Well, thanks for joining us, Margaret. I'm glad you.
Anyway, yes, and thank you for organising. I look forward to the next one.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.